Statement 12 says, the three obscurations are the same in being the afflictive obscurations. So the context of this Vajra statement is that in the, especially in the Mahayana system, there in that system, when you look at various sutras from the Mahayana sutras, you can find the Buddha identifying three types of obscurations, three types of veils. So veil or obscuration, there already implies that these are the things that obscure or cover up our true nature, which is Buddha. But our Buddha nature, there are three veils. So particularly in this very influential Buddha nature teaching called Ratnagotra, or also called Uttara Tantra. Here, although the word Tantra is in there, it's not a secret mantra teaching, it's a sutra level teaching. A sutra tradition text called Uttara Tantra. Very influential Buddha nature text in Tibet, especially. And so in the Uttara Tantra, there the Buddha identifies three types of obscurations that are said to obscure our Buddha nature. So these three types of obscurations, what are they? They are the obscurations of karma. Then there are the obscurations of mental defilements or afflictive emotions, or here translated as the afflictive obscurations, afflictive emotions or mental defilements, kleshas. And the third is the obscurations of the objects of knowledge, and the objects of knowledge obscurations. So if you look at these three, karmic obscurations are the most obvious. Klesha obscurations, the mental defilements obscurations, are kind of middling in how obvious they are relative to karmic obscurations. Then a more subtle obscuration is the obscurations that we call the objects of knowledge obscurations. So karmic obscurations are the unskillful actions that we engage in. Those become karmic obscurations. Then especially when those causes ripen into results, and those results manifest obviously, those results manifest very obviously as suffering. When we are then under the power of that suffering, it obscures, it's very hard for us to continue to believe or to see even, that we are Buddhists. We are just plagued, right, by suffering. By the way, very useful, a Western American teacher many years ago came up with this definition. It's not a classic definition, but it is in agreement, I think, with the classic definition. But here he says, suffering is pain multiplied by resistance. So the good news is, or the bad news first, is that pain, as long as we have a human body or any bodies, pain is part of having a body. In fact, if you look at the physiology of pain, and then, then pain is the body's way of signaling to us there's something wrong here. pay attention. Right? Unfortunately, something wrong may or may not be fixable. Multiplied by resistance, meaning multiplied by resentment, multiplied by resistance, multiplied by inability to accept, multiplied by anger, multiplied by, blame, then that turns into suffering. Then good news is, suffering can become zero if we take away all the, whatever it is being multiplied with, resentment, resistance, blame, all of that. Then if you are able to remove that, then no suffering. So anyway, this is helpful, I think. Think about this, when you are experiencing suffering. What are you adding to pain? Even mental pain. In a way, you could say mental pain, like physical pain, initially when it turns up, it's a signaling to you, hey, something is wrong. Can you please pay attention? But then instead of paying attention, we add this other stuff that then magnifies the suffering. Or then mental pain turns into suffering. Sometimes we think mental pain must be the suffering that the Buddha is talking about. Well, possibly. But sometimes also may be useful to think, this mental pain, maybe it's also part of, having the 5 aggregates, So then some degree of mental pain is going to turn up. If you relate to that mental pain, some degree of mental pain that turns up as simply part and parcel of being human or being alive, then a little bit more space to accept, a little bit more space to accept what is unfolding already. That not much can be done, Then you accept and say, well, this is part of being human, part of the human condition. Then it becomes less oppressive, Recently, a very important Buddhist figure in modern Buddhism, particularly those who are educated in Chinese. This monk who was born in China, and then when the communists came, and then he escaped to Taiwan, and then started one of the most influential Chinese Buddhist organizations in the world. I would say he is instrumental in all the transformations of the modernization of Buddhism in the Chinese Buddhist world. He recently passed away at the age of 97. Chinese we say 97, but Western is 96, completing the cycles, right? Of 12 years. Very nicely completing the cycles of the 12 years. And on the first full moon day of the year, he passed away. And I was watching one video somebody shared where he talked about suffering, And this interview was done maybe not too long ago, so towards the end of his life. And he has a good sense of humor. He says, sometimes I don't like it, when Buddhism or Buddhist teachers, are always talking about suffering. He says, suffering is strength. Suffering is nourishment. He says it's a matter of perspective. I want to translate that short interview. It was very heartening to hear him say, He said, don't be so afraid of suffering. So this is skillful, not afraid of suffering. Unskillful, not afraid of suffering is when we are creating the causes of suffering. We say, oh, it's okay. That's part of it. That's just part of being human. With regards to causes of suffering, don't give yourself too much excuse to say, oh, this is just part of being human. with regards to the causes of suffering. With regards to the effects of suffering already ripening, then yes, very skillful to say, well, it's just part of being human. As long as I have these 5 aggregates, this amount of pain is going to turn up, and this amount of pain has now turned into this amount of suffering. So I should just, not add more to it. Let it pass. Let me purify it. Let me cleanse this. And be grateful that it's ripening at the time where I can apply the Dharma and don't have to be a complete victim of the ripening of my past negative karma. Just let it pass. Anyway, just a footnote to this. So here, these 3 obscurations. So there are 3 types, right? So what was the context of Kyobpa Rinpoche saying? Essentially, all these 3 types, he says, they are all of the second type. So he says, karmic obscurations is derived from klesha obscurations. And klesha obscurations, at the root, is really what the obscuration of objects of knowledge is. These 3. Now, I think the first and the second obscuration is, you probably go, oh yeah, I know what that means. Now, then what is this obscuration to the objects of knowledge? So here, whenever the notions of subject, object, and action is involved, that is wherever ideas, concepts of I am doing this to you, whenever that is present, that is obscuration to objects of knowledge. In other words, whatever thoughts or feelings that arise out of subject-object duality, that is an obscuration of the objects of knowledge. And this is called obscurations of objects of knowledge because when this kind of obscuration exists, right, it obscures us from fully seeing and understanding objects. In other words, Buddhists, for example, right, they have cleansed these obscurations to the objects of knowledge. Objects of knowledge it's like a Buddhist technical way of saying things. What are things? Simplistically, we call things things. But in a Buddhist psychology way, it says what we call things. If you're able to understand that basically everything is an object of your knowledge, meaning potentially it can be known. But all the time, instead of knowing, we are obscured by unknowing. And so that unknowing is the obscuration of the objects of knowledge. And so this is very subtle. This is about duality. So here Kyobpa Rinpoche is saying, of the 3 obscurations, they are all afflictive. They are all mental defilements. This is said in a larger commentary in response to those who say, the 3 obscurations, they all have separate and different causes, and they are distinct. We don't know much about the people who say this, and therefore what their arguments are, right? Actually, we don't. We don't have a lot of evidence. Like who are the people, who say that these three obscurations are distinct and different from one another? We could speculate that the people who say this are also then saying, oh, these obscurations, maybe karmic, is very dangerous. Oh, this objects of knowledge, oh, not so dangerous. Oh, the affliction, oh, that is dangerous. Or, one of the two or the three, they're establishing some kind of like, this is more dangerous, this is less dangerous, this is this, this is this, this is this, that, right? So here when Kyobpa says, although there are these three obscurations, essentially they are all the obscurations of mental defilements. There, I believe what he is emphasizing is, again, yes, you can divide, these things and say there are 3 types of obscurations, there are 7 types of obscurations, there are 84,000 types of obscurations. Essentially, they are mental defilements. Essentially, they are afflictive emotions. Meaning, they are productive of suffering. They are productive of suffering. They are the causes of suffering. And also, what is the root of afflictive obscurations? It's deluded ignorance that gave rise to the 3 poisons. Ignorance or confusion give rise to the 3 poisons of delusion, attachment, and aversion. See, in some discussions of the objects of knowledge obscurations, right, it can sound very clinical. Like suffering is not usually included in that discussion. It's treated in a more, I would say, clinical way, more philosophical, clinical way. Oh, subject-object duality, and this is why it obscures. And so in order to have full wisdom, you need to overcome subject-object duality and just rest the mind. And so sometimes, in emphasize, because there is, there is one good argument for saying something different from what Kyobpa says, which is all 3 obscurations are essentially obscurations of knowledge, of the objects of knowledge. Because you could make the argument that it is the most subtle of the 3, right? And it is what gives rise. First, you make the mistake of fixating on there is a subject, there is an object, and there's an action. And because of that, then the kleshas develop. And when under the power of the kleshas, then negative karma gets created. So there is, good reason to say to Kyobpa Rinpoche, actually, I think, the obscurations of the objects of knowledge, underlies all 3 of them. But here, Kyobpa wants to emphasize the afflictive emotions as the not so much more basic, but to emphasize that all 3 obscurations are kleshas, are mental defilements. In terms of the karmic obscurations, the mental defilements, how they are mental defilements, very obvious. very blunt. In terms of the objects of knowledge, how they are mental defilements, right? Not so easy to see. But essentially, what is the problem with them is that they are what afflicts the mind. They are what, right, defile the mind. And so here the statement says, the three obscurations are the same in being the afflictive obscurations. So let's see what Khenpo Kunpal says. Yeah, the three obscurations, that is, the afflictive obscurations, the cognitive obscurations. Now, this cognitive obscurations is what I translated as the objects of knowledge obscurations, cognitive obscurations, and the obscuration for mental stabilization. So he gives an alternative identification for the three obscurations. And so in another system, they talk about three obscurations as basically the klesha obscurations. Then the obscurations of the objects of knowledge, here translated as cognitive. And then there's this particular obscuration called the obscuration that which prevents, that which obscures the ability to achieve mental meditative stabilization. So here in the footnote, it says that this is taught in the Uttara Tantra, the Ratnagotra. But he also gives the definition, the identification that I just gave, which is all the karmic, the afflictive, and the cognitive obscurations are the same in being the afflictive obscurations. Affliction or delusion is the general name, and attachment and so forth are the specific individual names. But other than merely being different in terms of general and specific, they are all the same in being delusions. It is said in the Sutra of the Play in Full, I, the Buddha, have here completely removed with the plowshare of excellent discriminative wisdom the mental afflictions together with their dormant roots from which suffering and anguish arise. So essentially they are problematic because they are mental afflictions. The dormant roots here is referring to the obscurations of the objects of knowledge or cognitive obscurations, and then from which suffering and anguish arise in an overt way, that is the karmic obscurations. In other sutras too, the ground of ignorant propensities or the cognitive obscurations are also called delusions. Therefore, all these seem to be of the same meaning. So again, I think, my sense of this is that Kyobpa Rinpoche is concerned about people getting carried away. I think he's not so concerned about like the karmic obscurations and people misunderstanding that. I think that very obviously, is suffering nobody wants. I think he's more concerned about when the discussions go in the direction about this very subtle kind of obscurations. So subtle that as if, there is no mental defilements going on. He wants to highlight the fact that essentially, whether you talk about the three types of obscurations, and even if you identify the third type of obscuration as the obscuration of mental meditative stabilization, essentially why these things are even called obscurations is that what obscures about them is they are defilements. And these defilements are based on delusion, arising from ignorant delusion. So this is 412. Then along the lines of obscuring, In fact, not only are these, obviously obscuring things, karmic obscurations, klesha obscurations, and obscurations to objects of knowledge, or another system says obscurations, that which prevents the mind from achieving meditative stabilization. So not only are those things obscuring, veiling, covering the truth of who we are, essentially, Buddhas. In fact, now Kyobpa Rinpoche is talking about in 413. In 413, all the tenet systems obscure the ultimate truth. Tenet systems, these are the various philosophies developed within Buddhists, and of course, covering the non-Buddhist. That in fact, all these systems, they still obscure the ultimate truth. I think this is only in the Buddha's teachings you will see such a daring statement. Because this daring statement, potentially could be misused and misunderstood to undermine, right, everything the Buddha taught. Because the tenet systems are, after all, various aspects of what the Buddha taught. Perhaps you can say, well, maybe not what he taught, but what he taught and then what got developed from his teachings. But nonetheless, to say, all systems, all tenet systems obscure the truth, the ultimate truth. You don't see that, in other religions. They don't say, all the words of the Bible, is will obscure. All the things in the Quran, they obscure the ultimate truth. All the things in the Bhagavad Gita, they obscure the ultimate truth. In other systems, they don't say such, potentially outrageous things. But here, in our system, we do say that. So why, right? So here, let's look at Khenpo Kunpal's commentary. All the proponents of tenet systems assert that their own tenet system leads to the correct realization of the ultimate nature. So in other words, Khenpo Kunpal says, all those who hold this or that view, all those who hold this or that philosophical system, not only do they hold that system and say that that system is the best, they will say that that system can lead you to the correct realization of the ultimate nature. However, here, Kyobpa says all the tenet systems are made by minds with sounds and thoughts, and therefore they will obscure the ultimate truth. The nature that is the object of self-cognizing wisdom and is free from all elaborations, meaning this ultimate truth. This ultimate truth is the object of self-cognizing wisdom and is free from all elaborations. Therefore, all the systems that are built based on logic, reasoning, all of them, in the end, they still obscure the truth of what is. This is because in order to see the characteristics of the ultimate directly, one needs to be free from all manners of grasping in the mind. It is said in the King of Meditative Concentration Sutra, the Samadhi Raja Sutra, both existence and non-existence are extremes. Clean and unclean are also extremes. Therefore, the wise ones completely abandon the two extremes and do not even abide in the middle, even in the middle. This is kind of hinting at, even if you grasp at the middle way, because like in Tibet especially, everybody says, of all the tenet systems, of all the philosophical systems within the Buddhist umbrella, within the Buddhist family, the middle way tradition, the Madhyamaka tradition of Nagarjuna, that's the highest, that's the most profound. In fact, all Tibetan Buddhist tradition who are like influenced by the Indian Nalanda tradition, they all say, of all the philosophical systems developed within the Buddhist family, based on the teachings of the Buddha, the one by Nagarjuna and his descendants, they are the best, the most superior. But here, it says, even in the middle, in the Madhyamaka, you should not grasp. So the noble Rahula said, I pay homage and praise the mother of the victorious ones of the three times, the indescribable, inconceivable, inexpressible, transcendent, discriminative wisdom, unborn, unceasing, the nature of space, the domain of self-cognizing wisdom. This is a very famous four-line praise of the perfection of wisdom, often called the mother of all Buddhas. Maitreya said, since it is subtle, it is not an object of learning. Since it is ultimate, it is not an object of thought. Since the nature is profound, it is not an object of meditation, and so forth for worldly beings. Finally, Nagarjuna said, it is not known through others, it is peace, meaning all mental afflictions, all have settled. It is not constructed through constructs. It is a nature without thoughts, without differentiation. These are the characteristics of reality. So here, basically, what it's saying is, because, this is a tension within Tibetan Buddhism, you can say. Not a bad tension. I always have said, there are all these kind of very productive, very creative tensions that exist there. They are there, I feel, so that we don't go too far in one direction or the other direction and fall into these extremes. So these tensions kind of hold us as much as possible, hold us somewhere in the middle. But this middle, we should not fixate on this middle as a fixed place. This middle is also not a fixed place. These tensions hold us somewhere in the middle. If you can imagine, I've seen something like that, they create like these kind of toys now with technology. I've seen one is actually not toy. It's actually quite impressive. It's a prayer wheel, okay? I think they created this in Taiwan or China or somewhere. It's a prayer wheel. But it uses a very powerful magnet to somehow suspend it in space. So it's like levitating. When you turn on, right, this prayer wheel is like you put on a table, on some fancy table. It has to be fancy, because this thing is so fancy. Then you carefully place it. It's basically hovering. Then you turn the thing on. Then you can put your hands away. Then this thing turns, and it's levitating. But no, it's actually some sort of magnetic. It's holding it in place. So also I've seen, some kind of this more like a gadget toy, Like this is more like air pressure coming from all directions in such a way that this ball, can just perfectly kind of hang in the air, because just the right amount of pressure is coming from all directions, so it holds it. In a way, I feel like, when we talk about the middle way, although there is one philosophical tradition that has captured the word middle way to make it their own brand, so like the Nagarjuna system calls itself the middle way. Yeah, actually, essentially, the Buddhist calls his teaching the middle way. So sometimes in these explanations, they say there is the Buddha's middle way, which has nothing to do with a particular philosophical system founded by a particular person, but simply the Buddha's middle way is the middle way that is the reality. That is talking about reality as it is. That's Buddha's middle way. Then there is the systematic, or there is a system that calls itself the middle way. That's kind of Nagarjuna's tradition, Dhyamaka. But the Buddha's middle way is not a fixed position. I would say that it arises out of this tension. Just enough tension, right? From both directions to keep it levitating. If one side loses some, so it's kind of like this middle way. It's delicate, meaning for us, to be able to exist within these two tensions. So what are the tension, right? In this case, one tension is there's tremendous emphasis in Indian Buddhism, late Indian Buddhism, Nalanda tradition, in mastering all the details in a very scholarly manner. So in Indian Buddhism, when somebody calls someone a scholar, it's not a term of insult, okay? These days, we use that term like it's an insult. Oh, he's a scholar. That means we say he's not the real thing. But no, late Indian Buddhism, values highly, a pandita, a scholar. So there are many ways of, emphasizing how these scholars, these panditas, they're doing very important work, and that we too have to emulate the panditas in studying the Dharma and knowing all the categories, knowing all the differences, knowing all the different, subtle differences, all of that. On the other hand, there's also this emphasis on not getting stuck with words, with concepts, with divisions, with categories. Sometimes this tradition or this style is called the kusali, right? The beggar's way, or the kusulu, the beggar's way, which is all your books, all your theories, all your divisions, all your, all that is just. So in this case, right, you could say Kyobpa's style is more kusali. Like all these words, all these divisions, they will just mislead you, if you get too excited over them. In the context of the 12th century, there's another group, that will say, this is just laziness. Don't want to study the sutras. Don't want to study the shastras. If you don't study the sutras and the shastras, and then you say you meditate, what are you meditating on? You're just meditating on your confusion. So that's what they would say, which also is valid, even though if we primarily, I don't know about you, but primarily I identify as, I follow Kyobpa Rinpoche's, well, to whatever degree I'm able to. I say, I follow Kyobpa Rinpoche's way. And it's like, yeah, we are more like the Kusali, Kusulu, but at the same time, yeah, sometimes it can just become laziness, Like if you don't know what the sutras say, what the Shastra says, the treatises, what the Tantras say, after all, those are, we believe at least, those are instructions that the Buddha gave, So if we don't carefully study that, how do we know what we're supposed to cultivate, which is what meditation means, right? So it's never one or the other completely. It's that we need to be sensitive to this creative tension, and think of ourselves as that little, fluttering little light ball, that can be suspended in air, by just enough tension. Then we can be suspended in air, and in that way, middle way. But this statement here is basically reminding us, warning us that all systems of tenets obscure the ultimate truth. So this is said in response to people who claim that the truth, the ultimate truth, is realized when we negate the wrong views and master the right views. So this is the purely Pandita way. They say, well, how do you arrive at the absolute truth, the ultimate truth? Well, by negating mistaken truths and finally mastering the correct truth. So this Kyobpa Rinpoche's provocative statement here is to say, no, that's not going to lead you to the final truth. Because the final truth is not just a matter of straightening out your intellectual understanding. Clarifying, straightening out your intellectual understanding can be a helpful step, a helpful element, which is to some degree, right, why we are here every morning, except for weekends, why we are here. In part it's that, but know that that itself cannot lead us to seeing things as they are. A less fancy way of saying what this ultimate truth is, seeing things as they are. This is better, Sometimes we go ultimate truth, ultimate truth, ultimate truth, beyond thoughts, beyond concepts, la la la. It's all just fuzzy, fuzzy, fuzzy. It's dressing up ignorance to look like Buddha and call, that's the ultimate truth. So maybe better we say, to be able to see things as they are. To be able to see things as they are is in contrast to see things as they appear to be. How things appear to be, they appear to us in the way that we are confused. So all kinds of appearances arise due to all kinds of particular special makes of confusion that you have, that I have. To cut through all of that is to see things as they are. And so here Kyobpa says, as long as we fixate on this system or that system, then it will obscure. One analogy that I've used in the past is these various tenet systems, you could relate to them, you could see them as something along the lines of, this is an analogy. Of course, analogy have their limits. Don't take them too far. Don't be too literal. Think of it as something like a monkey needing to get from one part of the forest to another part of the forest. Yeah? A monkey needing to do that. And this monkey, in needing to get from one side of the forest to another side, knows that, right now, there is a very dangerous creature that wanders, that walks in the forest. Particularly, this creature is hunting monkeys. Hunting monkeys. But luckily, this creature cannot really climb trees. So for this monkey to safely get from this side of the forest to that side of the forest, of course, the monkey can walk, on the floor of the forest. And then, of course, he has to be very, very, very careful, always looking, for the signs of this creature. For the signs of this bear, maybe, some monkey hungry bear, So maybe even this bear can climb trees. But the monkey will be a lot safer in crossing this forest if he swings from branch to branch, up rather than down. Right? Down with so much things growing, hard to see, if there's a bear. But if you swing from branch to branch, you can see better, even if the bear has climbed up over the tree there, you swing to a different branch, right? So when you swing from branch to branch as a monkey, you hold one branch with your front hand, and the momentum of swinging takes you to the next branch. But when you are able to hold on to the next branch in front, what do you have to do with your last branch? You have to let go, right? Otherwise you'll be stuck. Or maybe even your hands are not long enough to really catch the next one. And so you have to let go of the last one to grab the next one. Then you swing again, right? So then the momentum will take you to the next branch. Then with this other hand, you grab that branch, quickly let go of this branch. In that way, you can think of these different tenet systems. And for you and me, maybe you're like, I don't study the tenet systems. Then we can say, whatever it is that we are studying, in the Dharma, we should not fixate on. We should know that they are a branch leading us to the next branch. And when you have grabbed hold of the next branch, you have to let go of this branch. If you don't, you might get stuck. Or worse, the momentum takes you far enough to the next branch, but your reluctance to let go of this branch, you cannot grab the next branch, and kaplunk. Then also, too confident that you can reach the next branch, and when you cannot, and then you let go of the last branch, then down to the floor. So in that way, these branches are all the tenet systems. They are not the other side of the forest. If we know how to skillfully engage the different tenet systems, if we know how to skillfully engage, right, the different aspects of the Buddha's teachings, then we don't become stuck and fixated, rigidly and insisting, this, that. So again, this is another set of creative tension. On the one hand, we emphasize so much, clarity about what is the cause of suffering, what is the cause of happiness, what to engage in, what to let go. On the one hand, we emphasize so much, right? But on the other hand, you cannot practice this as some kind of rigid system. What rigidifies the system, what rigidifies things, how things get rigid and stiff, and dead, is actually, our own ego grasping. We feel security when we have mastered something, and when we have mastered something, we don't want to let go of what we have mastered, because what we have mastered, gives us a false sense of success. It gives us a false sense of, I got it. But this kind of I got it just is a form of subtle grasping. So the two statements that we covered today, I think they're pointing in the same direction about what obscures. So in the end, even like with the tenet systems, right? It says here, they all obscure the truth. And if you want to know, well, in what way they obscure the truth? Not like not in an abstract way. How do they obscure the truth and all the theories? But in your own application of the tenet systems. If they give rise to kleshas, then they are obscure. So this is putting the two statements together. Last statements. Last statement, in fact, you can say, not just the three obscurations, whatever obscurations system that you can come up with, the 3, the 5, or the 3 with different members to them, whatever it is, they are obscurations as long as they produce afflictive emotions, they are based on afflictive emotions, they are based on mental defilements, then they are obscurations. Doesn't matter. So if you use that to apply it to, am I stuck in the tenet system? Am I stuck in the philosophical view? Well, you want to know that? See, as a result of holding on to this, what is it doing? It's giving rise to kleshas. Then it's obscuring the truth. So this is one way, I think, to think about, to bring these two statements, why they're placed right next to each other. This is one way. There's more than one way, I'm sure. So today we stop here.